What is up guys, it's SX Modern Warfare here, Gamertag Banjo Chicken, and welcome back to another video. So quite a different video again that we're doing here. We're doing a three-part series on building a budget gaming PC. So part one is going to be, which is this video, which is going to be ordering the components, so selecting the components that we want for our build, making sure they're all compatible with each other. Part 2 is going to be building the system, and part 3 is going to be installing the operating system and, testing out games, see how well it performs. This is different to the video I made on how to, on me building my own personal computer, which when I added up all the components, which people are asking me how much it costed, so I added up all the components and it was about £1,000, which is overkill if you're just starting off, like going from maybe console to PC. You want to get a gaming PC, you want to build a gaming PC. So I've got a good opportunity here because a friend of mine wants me to build a PC for him, and he's got a budget of about £500, which is a decent budget, but even if it's a little bit lower than that, you can still make a pretty decent gaming PC out of it. So that is what this video is going to be about. This is not an overkill system. This is, a budget gaming PC. So we're gonna see how good a gaming PC we can build for £500, or maybe just under £500. So first of all, we've got to decide what components that we're going to need for a computer. So we're going to need a motherboard, we're going to need a processor, we're going to need memory as in RAM, we're going to need storage devices like hard drives or an SSD. We're going to need a graphics card because it's a gaming system, and we're also going to need power supply and a case, obviously. So those are the components we need for a computer in general. But there are specific things that we need components to be, how good we need certain components to be in order to be good enough for a gaming system. So when the processor is concerned, we need at least a quad core processor. Dual core will impact performance, so we definitely want a quad core processor at least for a gaming PC. When RAM's concerned, we need at least 8 gigabytes. 6 gigabytes seems to be the minimum for a lot of games these days, so we want a bit higher than that. So 8 gigabytes is a good amount of RAM to start off with for a gaming PC. We can always upgrade that in the future. Then we're also going to need a graphics card. That is key. We can't go with integrated graphics because that's just not good enough. We need a graphics card, and I would say for a budget of £500, I would say a 2 gigabyte at GDDR5 type memory for a graphics card. And those are kind of, and I suppose for a power supply we need probably a minimum of about 500 or 550 watts. So that would be our sort of our ideal range for those components for them to be good for gaming. So let's start off and look at some components that we can buy. Now I'm going to go through this quite quickly, whereas you would obviously take more time to look over things and maybe do a bit more research than I'm going to be doing in this video. But for time constraint purposes, I can't go too in detail for ages and stuff like that, so we need to get on with things. But for you, I would suggest you do more research on things than what you see me doing in this video. But first thing we're going to look for is the processor and how powerful we need the processor to be. So I said a quad core, and because it's a budget gaming PC, we're definitely going for an AMD processor, no question. We're not going for Intel. Intel are more advanced processors, but they are more expensive. Sometimes they can be 3 times more expensive, and Intel processors are mainly perform better for doing stuff like 3D modeling, 3D rendering, that kind of stuff, whereas AMD processors are good for just gaming, really. I mean, not just gaming, but they would be better for gaming. I mean, an Intel processor would probably give you more frames than the equivalent AMD, but the AMD might be 3 times cheaper. Plus the AMD processors give you more cores for a cheaper price and higher clock speeds for a cheaper price, which is what you really need for gaming. So definitely going for an AMD processor without a doubt. So AMD quad core, I'm going to type into Amazon. I'm going to probably get most of the components from Amazon. You should really shop around and see if you can get any components on other sites for maybe a little bit cheaper, but Amazon usually has the lowest prices. But you know, you may find some other sites that have deals on or sales on, so it's worth to have a look around. So first one that comes up seems to say it's a dual core, and then it says it's a quad core over here. So I don't know, that's like conflicting information to me, so I'm not gonna be looking at that one. This one here though, AMD FX 4300, it is a quad core processor. It has 4 cores. So we'll have a look at this one. We can see that it has got 4 cores, has processor count 4. So we could go for this one, £63. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to open up the calculator and just enter in everything and add everything together so that we know how much everything's going to cost in total. So £63 for this processor, but I'm going to also see if we can maybe get a 6-core processor to see how much more expensive their 6-core ones are. So here we go, this one's an FX 6300, 6-core processor. We just check processor count is 6, which is what we want, and from what I can see it's only like £10 more expensive, pretty much £10–11 more expensive. So I think for 2 extra cores for only £10 more, I think I will go for this one, because if you have a lower budget than £500 then you should probably go for the quad core, but I'm going to go for this 6-core right here for £74 pretty much. So I'm just going to go ahead in my calculator, enter 74, and we can add that to basket. And now that we have selected a processor, we now need to start looking for all the other components and making sure that they will work with this processor. So we can see, well, the information that we're going to need from here is to note down that it is an FX6 type processor. We also want to note down that it is a AM3 Plus socket. We may want to also just note down that it's 95 watts. So that is basically what we want from that. So keep a note of that information, maybe just leave this up on the screen. And next we want to look for our motherboard. Now what Amazon is really good for is this frequently bought together. It shows what other people building computers who have bought this processor, it shows them what they also buy most commonly with this processor, and this is the motherboard that they seem to buy, which would lead us to believe that this motherboard is probably going to work with the processor because they're frequently bought together. But we still want to check to make sure. So just by looking at the motherboard, I can see 4 DIMM slots. It's got 1 PCI Express x16, probably x16 slot, and it's definitely an AMD type processor. You can tell the socket is a lot bigger than the Intel ones. AMD processors are bigger. So if we look at the details, we can have a look here. There's not much details. Amazon's not the best for details, so when it doesn't give you enough details, I suggest you just copy the name and paste it into Google. Try and get to Asus's actual website for the motherboard, because they'll have proper technical specifications on it. So we can go to specifications, we can see, so it does use the AM3 Plus socket, which is the same as the processor. It uses FX series processors as well, because ours is an FX6 and the quad core was an FX4, so that would probably be compatible with this board as well. 140 watts, well, our processor was 95, so that's within the range, so that's fine. So looking good so far. We'll have a look at the overview. So we can see here AMD X6 and X4, and ours is an X6. So yep, it looks like this motherboard is going to be compatible with our processor. So we can add that to our list. As I was saying, you would probably do more research yourself rather than what I'm doing. It's just because of this video. Can't go on for like 2 hours on this, so yeah. So anyway, 127 so far if we add the motherboard and the processor. But maybe before we decide to buy the motherboard, we should also look to see what else it has. So we need to make sure that it has enough capacity RAM, like maximum amount of RAM that it can hold, is 32 gigabytes apparently, which is more than enough for our 8 gigabytes that we're going to be putting in there, so that's fine. And it needs to be DDR3, and it also says it's DDR3 as well. When it comes to gaming PCs, you always want DDR3. I mean, there is DDR4 that's come out recently, but I think they're on really expensive new motherboards, so definitely DDR3 for a budget gaming PC, not DDR2, nothing old like that. So what we also need to make sure we have is PCIe times 16, at least one, which we have, and we need enough SATA ports. We've got 6 SATA 3 gigabyte connectors, which is fine for what we need, and that should do us just nicely right there. So yeah, I would definitely say this motherboard is okay to go and order. So once you've ordered the motherboard, we can now go and have a look at stuff that will go in the motherboard. So we've got our processor, we need RAM, we need random access memory, so we're going to have a look. I'm going to open up Amazon in a new tab, and we'll have a look for 8 gigabytes of RAM. And this is the one I always buy because they're usually fast delivery, and I've never had any problems. I've never had any of them fail, and they're good quality Corsair Vengeance RAM. But you could shop around for some cheaper ones, but I know these ones are good, which is why I'm going to order this. These are 2 4 gigabyte strips, which obviously gives us 8 gigs in total. So I'm going to add that on as well. What you want to look for with RAM is making sure that it's enough capacity. Make sure it tells you how many strips of RAM there are. The motherboard has, you can tell just by looking at the motherboard, it doesn't seem to give you any option to sort of zoom in. Maybe gallery will... gallery, there we go. So we can kind of see in more detail here that it has 4 slots for 4 strips. So we can see that the RAM is 2 strips, so that'll fit there fine, no problem with that. And it's DDR3, which is the same as the motherboard. So this RAM will definitely work with this motherboard. So we can go ahead and order that. And that's an extra £67. So we're 194 at the moment. So that's RAM, processor, and motherboard sorted. Next we want to go ahead and look for the case. So we'll have a look for gaming PC case. Okay, so this is a nice cheap one here. It's got LEDs as well, which is looking kind of good at the moment. Copy the name, paste it into Google, and see if you can get some more details on another website. So what have we got? Let's have a look, see if this gives us any more information on the case. So there we go. We've got more information. With a case, we want to look for the form factor of it, which is well, motherboard support / form factor. ATX, micro ATX, mini ITX. So ATX is what you're looking for. If it supports ATX, micro ATX, then it should be fine for any kind of ATX motherboard. This is an ATX motherboard, I believe. If we go back and have a look, you want to look for form factor down here. So yeah, you can see it's a type of ATX form factor for the motherboard, and this supports ATX motherboards, so, and macro ATX motherboards. So this case should also be fine with our motherboard, so we can go ahead and order this one too. So it's an extra £38. So that brings us up to 232. Okay, so we've got our case, we've got our RAM, we've got our processor, we've got our motherboards. So now we're going to need a power supply to power the whole thing. Okay, now moving on to power supply, you can just type in, to find this one, I typed in Corsair 500 watt, and I found this one. This one's a modular power supply, CX500M. So when you're looking at a budget of around £500, then you're probably wanting something that's a 500 watt power supply because it'll be quite cheap. You know, if you look at the 600 watt version of this power supply, you know, the price is 750. It really starts going up, whereas the 500 watt is, you know, nice and low price. And the thing you got to watch out for when you're ordering the power supply is, again, the form factor. So our case on our motherboard is ATX, so we need to make sure that it is an ATX power supply. Do not think that if it says mini ATX or macro ATX that it's going to fit in a full-sized ATX case, because in most cases it won't do that. So you need to be sure that if the case is a full-size ATX case, then the power supply needs to be full-size ATX as well. And then obviously if it's mini ATX case, then it's a mini ATX power supply you're going to need for it to fit in there. Then you want to look at whether it's modular or not. Modular power supplies like this one will help out a lot in terms of how tidy it will be in your case when you come to build it. If you do not use a modular power supply, then you'll have loads of cables lying all over the place, and that's fine if you have enough cable management in the back of the case to hide all of those cables. But if you don't, then it's not going to be a good thing. You're going to have loads of cables in the front of your case, and it's going to be really messy. And restrict airflow and stuff like that. It's not too much of a big deal, especially if you don't have a window on your case, so you can't see inside anyway. As long as you hold back the cables with cable ties, it's not a huge deal. It's really just for tidiness and stuff, but modular power supplies are pretty good in that respect, because you can just unplug the cables that you're not going to be using. The thing about these as well is you've got to make sure that they have enough watts for the type that all the components that you've got in your computer, and you need, so 500 watts is going to be fine for what we've got, and then we need to look if it has enough connectors to fit our case. So you can see that we use a 4-pin CPU power there and a 24-pin ATX power here. You can see that it's using a 24-pin ATX there, but then that looks like a 6-pin connector. However, it does have 4 pins attached. Again, if you go and just copy the name into Google, and then we will find it somewhere around here on ATX's on Corsair's website. We actually get proper specifications. And we can see that, you know, it has 4-pin peripheral connectors, PCI connectors, 2 PCI connectors, 5 SATA connectors, ATX connector. So this power supply would probably do, but you really need to do some more research into this. I'm not going to be using this power supply in my build because I have a spare power supply from my old computer that I swapped out a while ago when I built my new system, and that is the one I'm going to be using for this build. Saves me on costs. I don't have to buy another power supply. I can use a spare one that I have, and I know it has the necessary connectors and everything. But that's what you want to be looking out for. Make sure the wattage is high enough. Make sure it's the right form factor. Modular is a bonus, and make sure it has all the correct connectors. We're using 2 storage devices, so we'll need 2 SATA power connectors for that. We've got a 4-pin PCI power connector for the CPU power, a 24-pin ATX to power the motherboard, which most power supplies are anyway, and we've also got we've also got the graphics card to consider. So we'll need a 6-pin connector for graphics card, probably 2 6-pins, or a 6-pin and an 8-pin, or 1 8-pin maybe. So you've got to consider these things, weigh up what connectors that you need for everything in your system, and make sure the power supply you're buying has all those necessary connectors in order to power everything in your system. So the power supply that I have as a spare is basically a £32 power supply. So it's £32, so I will add that on to the budget, and we'll continue. And next we will have a look at some storage devices. So I'm going to type in 1 1 terabyte Seagate Barracuda. Because Seagate Barracuda hard drives, I mean, I use them in my computer. I've never had any problems with them, and they are quite cheap in comparison to, you know, Western Digital and you know, companies like that. So £44 for a Seagate 1 terabyte 3.5-inch hard drive. We want to look for the RPM, which is 7200, and the interface optimized for best performance, SATA 6 gigabytes, so the higher the better. But our motherboard only has 3 gigabyte connectors, but it will still be compatible, so that won't be a problem. And 7200 RPM, how fast the disk spins on the platter, which will increase the read speed and write speed of the hard drive. So 7200 RPM is good. If you have 5400, that's probably a bit too low. That's the kind of thing you'd expect in like in external hard drives. So 7200 RPM or even 10,000 something that they go up to. So we can add that one to basket. So that's an extra £44. So we'll go ahead and check that. £44 is going to be 308. So we've still got just under £200 more to spend. So because of that, obviously if you have a budget of like £400 or 450, then I would not suggest you go and get an SSD as well. Just use the hard drive as your main storage device. You can always update to an SSD sometime in the future. But with a £500 budget, I would say we can probably slap in an SSD on top of that. So 120 gigabyte SSD. You can get a decent one for £45. You can see like Samsung HyperX are quite a bit more expensive because they are faster, but any SSD is going to be a lot faster than a hard drive. It's going to give you a lot better performance. So I think we'll also go for this hard drive here, Kingston 120 gigabyte SSD now, same SSD I have in my system. So that's for an extra 46. So we'll go ahead and add 46. 354, add that one to basket, and that'll be another one that we have. So we've pretty much got all our components now. The last thing we need to have a look at is the graphics card. Okay, so now we come down to the graphics card. Now I've already searched for this. What you want to be searching for with a graphics card is 2 gigabytes GDDR5 graphics card. That's the type of memory that we can really afford on a £500 budget gaming PC build, is about 2 gigabytes. So I just wanted to show you a comparison of how you would compare graphics cards on price, because this one is slightly cheaper than this one, as you can see there. Now, how do you compare, or how do you decide which one is better and which one you're going to get when you compare these two graphics cards? So first of all, there's not much specs on Amazon, so again I went ahead, copied and pasted this into Google and got the actual Asus website, which contains the proper specifications of this card. And similarly, I found this deal a while ago, which is why I've pulled this up here, which this one's actually on sale right now and is cheaper than usual at £112. Now they're both 2 gigabytes of GDDR5 memory, so how do we decide which one's better? So this is where we have to look at our technical specifications. First of all, clock speed. This one does have a higher clock speed than this, but not significantly higher. It's only a little bit, which really doesn't mean much, to be honest. And then you've got stuff like power consumption, things like memory clock and bit rate, and cores is a particular one. So if we have a look at this graphics card, you can see it only has 640 CUDA cores, whereas this one has 1280 cores. Now they are slightly different because this is an Nvidia card and this one's an AMD card. The AMD uses Stream processors, whereas the NVIDIA cards use CUDA cores, which are slightly different, but they are still, you know, very similar things. So this only has 640, whereas this has 1280. So this one is far superior in that case. The other big thing to look at is the bit rate at once. So you've got 128 bits, and this one is 256 bits. So, you know, a huge increase there. Whereas the things that this card beats this card at are very small, like the clock speed's only a minute bit higher. The memory clock is a little bit higher, but the cores and the memory interface, the bit rate, is a lot lower than this card. So this card, I would say, is a superior card, and it's only a few pounds more expensive than this one. So that is how you would go and compare. Those are the main things you need to compare with a graphics card. Make sure that both cards are the same in terms of memory and type of memory, like GDDR5. I always have trouble saying that fast. And then you want to be looking for things like power consumption, clock speed, how high is the clock speed, how many cores does it have, what's the bit rate, how high is the bit rate when you compare cards, and you know, what's the memory speed. But the main one seems to be cores and bit rate for me when I'm buying cards. So that is why we're going to go for this one. So this is the card I'm going to go for, and that is £112. So we'll go ahead and add £112, which is 466. I always want it to be quite a bit under the actual price, because there is going to be shipping costs. Obviously, this is all coming from the UK, and I live in the UK, so the postage cost is not going to be a lot for all these components. Maybe a few pounds for most of the stuff. Some of the bigger items, maybe a little bit more than that, but that's why I don't want to go exactly to £500, because then I'm going to be overspending because of the postage costs. So that's 466, and we've got all our components for our build. So that is the end of part 1. Thank you for watching. Go ahead, leave a like if you liked the video, subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, or comment if you have any questions. And in part 2, well, I'll wait until obviously the components arrive, and then I'll be able to start on part 2, which is actually building this system.